Hello fellow Catholics, so it has exactly been over a month already since the posting of the Arian controversy part 1. And I figured that I should have waited a while before posting the second part, but that's why this video was made. It will be a short intermission and I will discuss the details of Arianism that I wasn't able to cover in the first video. Let's begin. So if you haven't seen the overview of the Arian controversy, check it out first, then come back to this one. First things first, if you remember how Arius developed his understanding that the Logos had his substance from nothing, you'll remember that it was in opposition of Sabellianism. Now just a brief rundown of what Sabellianism was. The heretical view that in God there are three modes or faces, in which all three modes are identical. It's just that our human mind views it as three modes, but there are no real distinctions. Now there is yet another view of God that we have to look further into. Granted, it wasn't a Christian view. Matter of fact, it was a pagan understanding of this Christian God. Now you might ask, why take into account a pagan's view of the Christian God? Well, it's of utmost importance to discuss this because, as we'll see, this is a huge part of the historical context that really puts Arianism in a light that makes us understand why Arius would preach the subordination of the Son and Spirit. Now the pagans' view was pretty simple. There wasn't a Christian God, but three gods as far as pagans were concerned. So we really get this picture. Arianism was a reaction to Sabellianism and reaction to the critique of Christians being called polytheists. The dilemma in question, thus, was attempting to explain how the oneness of God taught in the Old Testament actually was compatible with the exaltation of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as one God in the New Testament. Arius wasn't impressed by considering distinctions in God because, number one, it sounded too close to Sabellianism, and number two, Arius truly believed the pagans had a point. To him, it just didn't make sense to call all three people God and yet somehow still assert that they weren't three gods individually. Arius saw that this fallacy would only naturally gravitate an intelligent mind towards the notion of the modes of God, because if we couldn't properly assert that all three are gods because each individually is a god, then by logic we'd have to resort to dismissing the distinctions as simply modes, as a way to preserve the claim that God is one. So Arius had to refute two accusations against Christians. Number one, that assertion that Christians are in fact polytheists, worshipping three gods. Number two, the assertion that all three persons are just the same. And the strategy employed by Arius was as follows. He considered the Father as the supreme deity and the Son and Spirit to be created divine instruments that aided the process of creation, but they themselves were not equal to the supreme deity. Now this is significant because we gain a bit more of an understanding of what notions Arius had on God the Father himself. His claim that Jesus was not this supreme deity was also yet another rebuttal to the very widely held belief that God himself is transcendent but also immanent. Arius did not believe that this supreme deity came down and became incarnate because he did not believe that God had such a close relation with his creation. He could not fathom how a God can suffer and die. Arius then really took the Father and Son relation denoted in the New Testament at extreme face value. Truly he thought if Jesus is a son to the Father, he cannot possibly be of the exact same genes, so to speak, of his Father, but of similar genes. Thus the concept of homoousia, which means of like essence, and not homoousia, which means of the same essence. Arius argued he couldn't have been of the same essence, otherwise it would make him his father. Luckily, we had a guy that sorted all this mess out and was Arius' most furious opponent in Alexandria, Saint Athanasius. He saw the defense mounted by Arius as entirely destroying the salvation narrative. He asserted that if it is so that Jesus wasn't God, then the incarnation and passion meant nothing. The logic of Arius would imply that God truly doesn't want anything to do with us, and if he did not come down, then it means he has no interest in being intimately united to us. Jesus as a created instrument of mediation, then, would be like God's way of saying, I'm only touching you with a divine 10-foot pole, but I have no real interest in uniting myself to all of you. Now, for reasons of brevity and more obvious reasons, I won't get into why Jesus had to be God to save us. I will say this though, the most general statement is, this reconciliation exists in the being of Jesus Christ. In other words, Jesus being God but having human flesh is proof that God in fact does want to forgive us and be united to us. The existence of the God-man, as St. Athanasius calls Christ, is proof enough. But anyway, moving along to St. Athanasius, an amazing thing to notice about this great saint is St. Athanasius wasn't just dealing with a controversy that stayed in the 4th century. He took it upon himself to answer all the minor details surrounding the mystery of God. So when we see history in retrospect, we see that he was in fact answering questions that hadn't yet come up in his time, but would eventually appear and fuel controversy up until the 9th century. It's like he was basically 500 years ahead of his time, and because of it, he's seen as such a central, if not the central figure of the Nicene faith. So the way that St. Athanasius and really the entirety of the Catholic Nicene Church proves the oneness of God is simple. The oneness or the unity of the Godhead is in the fact that all three persons share one essence. They ascribe the unity to the fact that all three are God, and that though the paternal essence in fact is derived from the Father, making him source of divinity, which definitely is something even Arius could have agreed on. But the real breaking point is that the Son and Spirit equally are communicated or handed down the essence, one through generation and the other through spiration, Father to Son to Spirit, and thus the significance of the rankings in God. That's why the Nicene Creed begins by first confessing the Father, then the Son, and finally the Spirit. And so in order to finally come full circle and seal the reasoning that the unity consists of the consubstantiality, the Western, Alexandrian, and Cappadocian Fathers unanimously confess and assert that all three persons are in fact that one divine nature. So they refute the polytheistic accusation by identifying the distinct persons as being that one divine nature. And they refute Sabellianism by teaching that these three people are truly distinct, based on the fact that one has no origin, the second is begotten, and the third is spirated. And that is Arianism In-Depth. Tune in next time to explore more ancient topics that rock the foundations of the early Christian church. Thanks for watching.